Private Ned Gillen, Mont Blanc, October 4th, 1918. Dear Jinx, what's doing in Manifest, kid? Big orange harvest moon in your piece of the sky yet? Rainy here lately, skies cloudy. With the cold that's been settling in on us at night, I'm figuring it's October, though I've lost track of the days. We've had a rough go of it lately. Our regiment is down to about half its strength. Had our share of casualties because of this awful war. But we've had just as many guys taken out with dysentery and influenza. It's like their bodies are so worn out, once the sickness gets a hold of them, it just gets worse and worse till they're gone. Heck, Holler and me aren't sure how we've stayed ahead of it so far. Bellomy-Ezell elixirs ran out a lifetime ago. Guess we just ran so much no bugs can catch us. That's what we like to think anyway. Right now, just being here makes me think of home. We're stuck in our trenches. Stuck meaning it's so muddy I'm not sure I could get out if I tried. Rain's let up for now, but with wet clothes and wet blankets it's almost better if it keeps on coming. Better than the wind picking up and chilling our bodies. So if you're wondering why all this makes me think of home, it's the furthest thing from it. Up to my neck in mud, Ned. P.S. Later in October. Was running back to my regiment today from a rendezvous with command. Still had a couple of miles to go. Tearing through trees, trying to stay out of the shadows. I had a bag loaded with cans of beans for the fellas. A branch caught the bag and yanked it open. My buddies hadn't eaten in days, and I wasn't leaving without those rations. I had the bag half full when I saw him, a German foot soldier 6 feet away, eyeballing me through the sights of his gun. Nothing but our own puffs of frosty air between us. I was as good as dead, and for the life of me, all I could think to say was, Ich hab Wunderlich, footin'. I knew that wouldn't help, so with nothing to lose but those beans, I just kept picking them up slowly, one after another. Old Jerry lowered his gun and said 2 words before walking away. 2 words, Jinx. The Haus Gust. Go home. Don't I wish, buddy, don't I wish. The Jungle, August 11th, 1936. The night air was hot and humid as it hung in my room. The sheets clung to the sweat on my legs, so I threw them off in a clump mess at the foot of the bed. Even Ned's letter curled with the damp as I read it for the umpteenth time. I turned off my lamp and moved aside the limp curtains, thinking of Ned and looking for the big orange harvest moon he'd written of. There was only a sliver of moon to be found. The mementos had added up on the windowsill. I'd studied them so often they'd become private treasures to me, reminders of the stories they'd come from. The cork wiggle king fishing lure, the Liberty Head silver dollar, even little Eva Sabolski's tiny wooden nesting doll. I took only the remaining item from the Lucky Bill cigar box, the skeleton key. Miss Sadie had revealed nothing about it. What lock did it fit into, I wondered, or better yet, what skeletons was it hiding? I felt myself drifting off into sleep, the key conjuring up images of things hidden in my mind. Music flowed in and out of those images, harmonica music. I sat up as the music seemed to call to me, to invite me. I slipped my shoes on and padded outside in my pajamas, following the sweet, soulful sound. It was dark, and tree branches and bramble reached for me. The music grew louder as I rounded the bend near the train tracks. I felt the warmth radiating from the bonfire, saw the glow on the rough and ragged faces. I knew exactly where I was. People living on the road call it the jungle. Gideon says wandering souls tend to walk the same roads. For a lot of folks all over the country, those roads pass through places like this. Places where people who have no home, no money, no hope gather together for an evening, share a fire, and maybe some beans and coffee. where somebody leaves a mirror and a razor behind in a tree, so the next fella can catch a quick shave, where for a time they might not feel so alone. Shady sat among them, playing the harmonica, letting the notes drift around those men like a bedtime song. When he stopped, he said, "Anyone for another cup of coffee? There's plenty here, gentlemen." They held out their cups and Shady filled them. I watched from the bushes for a time, knowing I'd been wrong about Shady and his drinking. He would come back to the house in the morning with bloodshot eyes from the sleepless night and the smoky fire. His whiskers wouldn't be shaven because 10 other men had used his razor. He'd take a lie down for a while and then go back to gathering some extra odds and ends that somebody might need along his way. For some reason, I wasn't able to look away. Was this what those men considered home? Eventually, I made my way back to Shady's place and once more looked out at the sliver of moon, thinking again about Ned's letter. His cold nights in the trenches, wet and lonely, his talk of home. I thought of Gideon and wondered where he was tonight. Was he hunkered down with a few men by a fire? Was he eating a warm meal of beans and coffee? Was he thinking of me? Don't I wish, buddy? Don't I wish? Remember when? August 12, 1936. The response to the Remember When contest was better than we expected. Folks from all around town turned in their remembrances, written out on notebook paper, receipts, napkins, even toilet paper. It seemed everyone had a funny anecdote to share or a touching memory of a loved one. Hattie Mae said that since the contest was our idea, we could help judge the entries. So Letty, Ruth Ann, and I huddled together in the mailroom of the Manifest Herald, poring over letter after letter, often so caught up in the stories that we'd forget to even study the handwriting and have to look over a stack again. Hattie Mae printed as many as she could in the paper before the winner would be announced. Remember when? You could watch Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, or Charlie Chaplin in a moving picture show at the Empire Nickelodeon for a nickel. Mama Santoni played the organ, and during the Eyes of the Mummy, she got so anxious with her scary music, I spilled my lemon fizz and everyone thought I wet my pants. Rosa Santoni McIntyre. Mr. Devlin was the first person in town to buy a Model T Ford, and a week later Miss Devlin, on her way home from the Women's Temperance League tea, drove that Tin Lizzie into Bonner Lake. That must have been some tea. Andrea Manipatopoulos. We kids used to march around town singing, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, the boys are marching. I spy Kaiser at the door. We'll get a lemon pie and we'll squish it in his eye, so there won't be any Kaiser anymore." Stucky Cybulski. The Dry Bone Bill was passed, outlawing all alcohol in Kansas. Most of us didn't remember it then either. Anonymous. Sister Redempta delivered those 3 babies in one day. I was baby number 3. I hope she's ready when my baby comes next March. Betty Lou Carlson Mays. Mr. Underhill made a tombstone for Procky Netch, the milkman. He got the date of birth right, which was in 1862, but had to redo the name because, as everyone but Mr. Underhill knew, Porky was the son of a staunch abolitionist, and Proky was short for Emancipation Proclamation. Getty, short for Gettysburg, Nesh. When Otis Ackerson got thrown from his horse and ended up face down in Mr. Cybulski's pigsty. Harry Ackerson. Yeah, well, it wouldn't have happened if Harry Ackerson hadn't been riding his bike alongside and spooked my horse with his ding-a-ling bicycle bell. Remember that? Otis Ackerson. The names especially caught my eye. I knew these people. These names had become familiar to me, like friends, through Miss Sadie's stories. Even Betty Lou Mays from the beauty shop. I had recognized her when she'd visited Miss Sadie's house. But I didn't realize that her maiden name was Carlson. She must be Heckin Haller's sister. She's not barren after all. It was like putting together a big family tree. And even though I wasn't familiar with the tales they told, I felt like I wasn't just reading about them. It was more like remembering them, as if somehow their memories were becoming mine. "Here, read this one," Letty said, passing me a prescription slip from the office of Dr. Dennis Monahan. "Remember when Margaret Evans and I tied for senior president, and we drew straws to decide the winner? I wanted the post, but she was the better man. Doc Monahan." The sad mixed with the sweet and set a warm feeling in my stomach. But would there be one about Gideon? I drew another out of the pile. This one came all the way from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. "Remember when Ned Gillen won first place in the state track races? That kid could outrun trouble, and he needed to, what with the company he kept. Haller Carlson." A few days went on like this, with more and more memories coming in. Then, the day of the deadline, Miss DeVore delivered a new stack of envelopes. Letty, Ruth Ann, and I started in, opening a few, when Letty gave a gasp. She turned a little pale and, without a word, handed the letter to Ruth Ann. "Well, that'll be dipped in sugar," Ruth Ann handed me the written note, in straight up and down letters that looked so much like they were plodding across the page. "We found our match. To whom it may concern. I have read your recent columns regarding post-goings-on in this town. I should think you would be more responsible with the information you print in this publication you choose to call a newspaper. I have no such recollection of ever having mistakenly engraved a name on any tombstone, let alone a name as ridiculous as Prokey. Furthermore, whoever would name their offspring after the Emancipation Proclamation should blame themselves for any misprint. Mr. Underhill." "So Mr. Underhill is the Rattler?" I asked in disbelief. "He's creepy enough, but he just doesn't seem the Rattler type." "Yeah, he seems more like a lizard or a toad," Letty agreed. "But it's here in black and white," said Ruth Ann. "It's the same handwriting that was on the note at the treehouse, telling us to leave well enough alone." We all stared at the newspaper. There was his handwriting, with the last letter trailing off like a dying breath. Miss Sadie's Divining Parlor, August 23rd, 1936. I was so excited to be the bearer of such important news that I ran all the way back to Shady's place. I planned to tell him the whole story of how we'd been searching for the Rattler all summer and we'd found him. So I was disappointed to find him gone. I can't say I was surprised, though, now that I knew what kept him busy at odd hours. Still, I was itching to tell somebody, so I skedaddled over to Miss Sadie's and tromped up her stairs and into her house. "Miss Sadie, guess what?" I called. "Miss Sadie?" I said again, looking first in the parlor and then in the kitchen. I saw her through the window, sitting on the back porch. "Miss Sadie," I said, bounding outside, "you'll never guess what happened. We found out who the Rattler is. At least, we think it's the Rattler. It's Mr. Underhill. He left a note at the treehouse. We had a contest, and..." Miss Sadie hadn't even looked at me. She just sat rocking.